When you are hurt, and which happens many times in life, when you are in pain, at that time ask yourself this question: who in me is feeling the pain? So if you want to go beyond your own ego, or if you want the other person to not have their ego, or basically drop the barrier, the first thing you need to do is exercise compassion. If you tell them, if you appreciate what they are doing rather than what they are not doing, I promise you, try it any day, do it for a week or 10 days, they will soften up. They will mellow down. And same goes for yourself. Rather than being hard on yourself all the time, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing this. Everybody procrastinates, I know this for a fact. But everybody thinks the successful people don't do it, so and so person doesn't do it. That's not true. When you have a lapse in keeping up with a discipline, take it easy. Don't punish yourself. Because if you do, when you punish yourself, you are only making the imprint of the ego harder, stronger, deeper, thicker. If you have that view of compassion for yourself, for your family, for your society, for the world, you will never face a challenge that somebody is not listening to you, that somebody is not understanding your viewpoint. In fact, the other person's viewpoint, whether they agree or disagree, becomes immaterial if you drop your own viewpoint. For a moment, if you drop your own viewpoint, then you've already agreed. Resistance is gone. There is no fight. There is nothing. Ego thinks it's always the other person. I'm reminded of two little anecdotes. One is a joke, the other one is a little story, which is a real life story. I should tell you both. One will make you laugh, the other one will make you think. There was a husband and a wife, and they were growing old, and the husband constantly found himself repeating to his wife. And he thought, and he was sure that the wife is now hard of hearing. He said, I really think we should go see an ENT specialist and get your hearing checked. She said, nothing's wrong with my hearing, I'm just fine. And he said, well, trust me. There's no harm in getting a test. And she said, no, I'm not going to any doctor, I'm just fine. He had a friend who was a physician. He went to his friend and doctor friend. He said, well, my wife is hard of hearing and she's not believing me. How do I make her believe that she actually needs a hearing aid? He said, well, what you do is when you go home, from a distance of about 60 feet, as soon as you enter, you ask her a question, any question. If she answers, that means her hearing is just fine, and actually it is your illusion in that case. If she doesn't answer, then you go 10 feet forward and ask the same question again. For every 10 feet you move forward, consider 15% hearing loss. So if she answers at 50 feet, she is 85% hearing. If she answers at only 40 feet, she is hearing only 60%, and so on and so forth, 70%. So he says, well, that simple test, I'm sure she will see the trees from woods. He goes home, he opens the door and shouts, honey, I'm home. What's for dinner? No answer comes back to him. And he's certain that at least there is 15% hearing loss. So he goes 10 feet forward, shouts the same question again. What's cooking for dinner? He yells. No answer comes back. And he says, well, there is at least 30% hearing loss for sure now. He steps forward another 10 feet, asks the same question again, no answer. All the way, he keeps asking, and he ends up in the kitchen, next to his wife, within a 10 feet range. And he says, I've asked you 5 times, what's for dinner? And you haven't answered even once. She said, what's wrong with you? I've told you 5 times I'm making pasta. She said, I've told you 5 times I'm cooking pasta tonight. He thought that she was hard of hearing, but clearly the truth was exactly the opposite. But when you think, I've got it all covered, I've got it all figured out, you won't see the truth of the other person. Forget the other person. You won't even see your own truth. And the other real life little anecdote I was going to give you, this person from Canada went to Japan to teach English. So in his class, there was a girl who came wearing a surgical mask on her mouth. Now this was the change of the seasons, and more and more people were getting sick. So he thought, well, surely everybody wants to protect, but this is going a bit overboard, wearing a mask and walking around. So in order to make his point, he said in his class, he said, well, some people really go overboard in Japan, don't they, to save themselves from allergies. And he looked at that girl who he intended to pass on this message. The girl comes back, says, actually, in Japan, the one who is sick wears this mask to avoid spreading it to others. And it's something he could have never been imagined. When we are hurt because of any action of the other person, and you can't seem to agree, there is one question you should ask yourself at that time. I'm not saying that will make you accept their action. That will give you a new perspective. And the question is not what did they do, but what was their intention? If the other person was genuinely intending to do good to you, but they end up causing damage, then they have every right to seek forgiveness. And you have every obligation to forgive them. Because everybody makes mistakes. And it requires putting our ego aside for a moment. It requires just taking it easy for a moment to say, look, I messed up. The greatest mistake you can make after making a mistake, or let's say the second great mistake you can make, is not to admit it. Because you can't correct it if you won't admit it. But you can only admit it if you're willing to let go of your stance. Anything you cling to, I want you to know it's ego. Ego gets a boost by clinging onto things. Anytime you are able to let go, you are in love. But all of the times, you are in ego.